chère Filia. Et en fait, au nom de mes collègues, j'aimerais grandement vous remercier. Nous sommes ravis d'être ici aujourd'hui pour en discuter un peu de la fusion de nos ministères. La fusion, à notre avis, contribue même dans ce court délai à l'amélioration de la cohérence de la politique étrangère, de développement et de commerce international et renforce, de notre avis, l'efficacité de notre action internationale. Mais avant de rentrer dans tous ces détails, j'aimerais tout d'abord présenter mes collègues qui sont de mes côtés. Lise Filiatrault, que je crois que tout le monde connaît. Lise est sous-ministre adjointe pour le secteur de l'Afrique subsaharienne. Lise a été nommée à ce poste en novembre 2013. Elle a une expérience importante au sein du ministère en développement et dans tous les secteurs géographiques, en effet. Leslie Norton, que je crois que tout le monde connaît aussi. Leslie est directrice générale pour l'assistance humanitaire internationale dans la Direction générale enjeux mondiaux et du développement. Leslie est en fait un de nos collègues le plus expérimenté dans le gouvernement du Canada dans le domaine des affaires humanitaires. Quelqu'un qui est très respecté, non seulement ici au Canada, mais je peux renforcer quelqu'un qui est très respecté du côté du domaine international aussi. Nous aurions aussi l'occasion d'entendre un message enregistré par mon collègue David Morrison, qui est là. David, qui est le sous-ministre adjoint des Amériques, est dirigeant principal du développement au ministère aussi, mais désolé que David était en voyage, mais on a enregistré quelque chose de David. Donc, ce que je propose de faire, si vous me permettez, j'aimerais commencer par un aperçu de la fusion, suivi des brefs renseignements concernant la Direction générale des partenariats pour l'innovation dans le développement, où moi j'ai le plaisir de s'occuper le poste de SMA depuis les dernières 12 semaines. Donc, it's been a very short amount of time, but I'm delighted to give you a little bit of an overview on how we're doing in partnerships for Development Innovation Branch. So here's the scoop, just to give you a little mise à jour. I know that you're all very aware that Budget 2013 announced the creation of the new DFATD, the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development. This built on previous policy decisions. Many of you will recall that in 2006, the government had reunited foreign affairs and international trade. And that was really to try to help foster what the government felt were natural synergies between its international trade functions and its foreign affairs and policy initiatives. And it has, that original fusion back of trade and foreign affairs has, from our perspective, led to better outcomes for Canadians, notably by increasing economic opportunities through our international engagements, but also ensuring that when we're engaged, for instance, in trade negotiations or trade discussions, that those are also informed by foreign policy implications and considerations, and vice versa. And so the government felt that there would be similar opportunities and synergies that could be built with our development assistance. And so it took the decision in 2013 to amalgamate foreign affairs and international trade with CEDA. And in doing so, at the same time, the government established the position of the Minister for International Trade as enshrined in law. And as are his or her roles and responsibilities. And that's the first time that that has been the case. So as Julia mentioned, we're actually going to be marking the 2-year anniversary of the initiating legislation, Bill C-60. And in that time, there's a couple of there's many actions that have taken place, but there's a couple that I'll highlight. So the first is we've got the new vision statement that you've all seen that's on our website. So we serve Canadians, we promote Canadian values and interests, we seek to solve global challenges and bring prosperity to Canada and the world. We have a new organizational structure, although that will probably continue to evolve as with any organization, right? All of your organizations are continuing to evolve, and that will be the same for us over time. That org chart is on the website, as you had, not that you asked me, but I deliver, but just so you know, it's there. I would say that we've also gone through a process of revitalizing and really re-looking at our internal processes. So how are we functioning? Are we fit for purpose? Are there ways that we might be able to move some things around so that like is with like? And Leslie and I worked for many years on humanitarian affairs. You had a component in foreign affairs. You had obviously a component with Leslie's shop. We did complementary things. And so it was only natural that we were going to look and see how might that work better in an amalgamated context. And so that's what the colleagues have been doing. And as we've been making these changes, we've been working hard to make sure that we're also still continuing, obviously, to deliver our programs, even as we're looking internally at ourselves. We want to make sure that we're not doing that to the detriment of delivering on our international programs and administering Canada's international aid so that we're alleviating poverty and providing humanitarian aid. Donc, dans sa nouvelle structure organisationnelle, le ministère est dirigé par 3 ministres, 3 sous-ministres et un sous-ministre délégué principal. Et ils ont l'appui de 3 piliers principaux. Tout d'abord, il y a l'équipe de l'administration, donc les ressources humaines, la plateforme internationale, la planification ministérielle, les finances et la technologie de l'information et les affaires publiques. Ça, c'est pilier 1. Pilier 2, c'est l'équipe géographique, l'Afrique, l'Europe et le Moyen-Orient, les Amériques et l'Asie du Pacifique. Et le 3e pilier, c'est l'équipe des programmes et des politiques. La politique stratégique et sommaire, les enjeux mondiaux et du développement, c'est l'équipe que Leslie fait partie, la sécurité internationale et l'intervention en cas de crise, les partenariats pour l'innovation dans le développement du commerce international et l'innovation, le délégué commercial en chef du Canada, les ententes et les négociations commerciales et les affaires consulaires. Donc, ce sont les 3 piliers du ministère et en fait, il y a des liens entre les 3 qui sont très étroits. Et donc, si vous désirez d'explorer davantage ces questions, je vous invite aussi de consulter notre rapport sur les plans et les priorités du ministère qui est sur le site web aussi depuis le 9 avril. Donc, ça vous donne aussi une bonne indication de quels sont nos plans et priorités pour l'année qui s'en vient. Operationally in the field, one of the things that's happened is heads of mission have been given critical roles as integrators. I mean, frankly, it was always thus, but it's very different to then have the overall responsibility as a head of mission to determine what you're going to do with the people, as opposed to kind of nominally being responsible for everyone that's in your mission. Now we can direct our assets. I could direct my assets. I'm no longer directing those assets. But what I would say as a recently former head of mission is it was fantastic and certainly enables us to maximize the resources that we have at the mission and to play to the strengths of the different teams so that they're reporting directly to the HOM as opposed to necessarily first having to go back, double check to make sure that it's okay within a separate ministry, then come forward. The head of mission can really make sure that that integration is happening on a daily basis, and I'm sure that's something that Lise will want to speak more to. But in Geneva, where I was head of mission, it was fantastic. The relationships that we had across my humanitarian team, my political team, my development folk, and my trade colleagues really did enable us to maximize our efforts. I've seen this also watching from a distance with our colleagues working in the Ukraine team, for instance. It's amazing to see how they've been able to collaborate within the mission. Indonesia, the same. So it's starting to really, by providing heads of mission with that authority, it's making a difference on a daily basis. And our planning tools at our missions have also become integrated. So we have one strategic planning tool now that everyone has to provide their plans and priorities into so that it's clear where we're heading in a given geographic or multilateral context. It's probably useful for me to also note that amalgamation coincided with Blueprint 2020, which I'm sure that everyone is very familiar with. This is the public service-wide, bottom-up and top-down effort to reinvigorate the public service and make sure that we're best fit for purpose as we go forward to be able to serve Canadians. And I would say that DFATD has done a good job of trying to take advantage of the Blueprint 2020 coming in at the same time as amalgamation so that we could relook at our processes to see if we could piggyback on some of the interesting ideas that were coming forward from Blueprint 2020 and work it into the amalgamation process. Changes have also occurred in our internal governance, and you know, we've been very careful to make sure that we focus on integration where it makes sense, but not necessarily integration, right? There are some areas where it won't make sense to necessarily combine functions and processes. But within the governance, we've really taken a hard look, at least in the first go-around, to see where it makes sense. We're also looking at our internal competencies of our staff, right? Do we have the right staff profiles? Are there opportunities for us to see how we can shift competencies around so that people can benefit, you know, so that in my area, for instance, I can take advantage of potentially having some trade officers come in to work on our sustainable economic growth programs, and vice versa, to have some of my officers from partnerships go elsewhere within some of the functional units within the department. We also want to make sure, though, as we're looking at competencies, that we're also continuing to value each of the streams, right? So we don't want to we want to make sure we don't lose what is the particular dynamic that a career development officer brings, or a political officer, or a consular officer, or a trade officer. There are distinct advantages of having those individual expertise, and so we're looking hard at how do we make sure we value that and at the same time encourage cross-fertilization. We've also been working on adjusting our systems and tools, so things like financial data and how we manage our financial systems. And this is an area, for instance, where the former CEDA was stronger than the former DFAT. And so we've taken on board a lot of the processes that former CEDA had to up the whole department's game in terms of financial oversight and management. Just as former DFAT had better platform systems in terms of email. Some of my colleagues might not agree with that. But the sense was, you know, with the Outlook system and given our network of, you know, more than 200 points of service abroad, that was something that DFAT brought to the table. And so we've looked and tried to see which systems make the more sense for us to use. And we've really been working hard to make sure that the amalgamation component, we think through the people side of it as well, right? So as we've been shifting folks, you've probably noticed that there's people moving from 200 promenade de partage over to 125 and vice versa. So again, it's to encourage the right mix. And here, the physical co-location makes a difference. And I've lived this in a number of my roles, but if I think back to my time in Kandahar, for instance, where we physically co-located our civilian officers with our military colleagues, it made all the difference in the world. Having my development team physically co-located with their CIMIC counterparts was very effective. And important. And so we think it's going to be the same in this instance, having the geographics and the functionals all together in the same building to be able to interact with each other. There's nothing like being able to walk about to see your colleagues. And thinking through, well, what does that mean and how do we reduce the impact on our folks? And so even things like establishing a shuttle service between the different buildings has been established as a result of amalgamation, something you would have thought would have existed before, but hasn't until now. So I think, you know, we're very conscious as we're thinking through the rollout of amalgamation. How do we make sure that we're continuing to embrace and respect our comparative advantages across the stream, even as we're looking towards better integration? And this is happening on the policy development side too. And so, for instance, David's going to speak to you in his capacity as Chief Development Officer. But we've also established a Chief Trade Officer and a Chief Political Officer. Again, it's part of that, making sure that we're speaking to the respective comparative advantages, valuing the streams at the same time as we're looking at being an amalgamated whole. Also on the policy side, I would say that since amalgamation, we've also looked at updating the direction on the 5 thematic priorities that were developed. And this has been done in the form of strategic papers that provide information and guidance on the department's approach to the integration of the cross-cutting themes. They've been recently launched on the DFATD website under the development section, so I encourage you to have a look at them if you haven't already. And to better understand the importance of taking these issues into consideration when addressing development challenges. And again, this has enabled us to have a whole different kind of conversation with our colleagues on the political side and the trade side than was necessarily the case before, because they own these thematic priorities as well now, and certainly the colleagues like Lise, who has taken amalgamation down to the officer level, it really forces different kinds of conversations amongst the team that might have otherwise been the case. And I would say that these strategic papers are complemented by the requirements that are integrated directly into the authorized programming process on the application forms. And I think there's a session on the APP later today as well. And further supporting guidance documents are being developed and are going to be disseminated in the coming months. So again, we're benefiting from amalgamation to have these kinds of conversations. So I would say overall that the amalgamated approach so far, it's been a lot of hard work, most of it done, well, a lot of it done by the colleagues at headquarters, and Lise is best placed to speak to that. But in the field, we're also seeing its rollout, and that's, you know, frankly, at the end of the day, where it's going to have the direct impact on a daily basis. And we really think that it is improving our ability to deliver on the department's mandate. We think it's augmenting our capacity as a whole. So far, it's going to be a continued process. Any of you who've gone through change management understand that you don't stop at any one point in time. It's going to be a continuous process. But I would say that we're satisfied so far that we're making good headway. So with a couple more minutes that I'm going to steal, maybe just to give you an update on how we're doing in partnerships for Development Innovation Branch. I have to say that I've argued since my arrival that internally, I think our branch is at the vanguard of amalgamation in a number of ways. And why do I say that? We say that because we deliver programs under all 5 thematic priorities for the International Assistance Envelope. We're a key link with a diverse group of Canadian stakeholders that cut across trade, diplomacy, and the development portfolios, right? If I look at my branch, we deal with governance and democracy, we deal with sustainable economic growth, we deal with education, we deal with health, we deal with a number of issues that cut across and require us to engage dynamically with our colleagues across the department. And we're often, I would say, the first face of the department in working with new and non-traditional partners. So I think this positions our branch quite uniquely, and this has certainly been the message that I've been giving to my team and to others, that now is a fantastic opportunity for us to take up some of that space, and obviously with your assistance in that respect, since we do work so systematically with you. Our main mandate, as you know, is engaging Canadians in partnerships and to support innovative programs in international development so that we advance poverty reduction, foreign policy, and international trade. And I think here the branch's relationships with a diversity of Canadian and international actors, whether they're from civil society, think tanks, academia, the private sector, foundations, and many others, offers us an important value added in enhancing our international development cooperation. And I've enjoyed these first couple of weeks reacquainting myself with many of you who I knew before, but also meeting so many new actors in the Canadian landscape that are interested in international development, and some that just are interested in making sure that they do no harm in international development, which I'll take also. And so it's been a fascinating window, and again, you know, I see such opportunity for the branch going ahead. Our development approach, with its focus on innovation, new tools, and new partnerships, I think is going to better equip us to come up with new approaches to dealing with global poverty, but it should also reinforce that focus that I mentioned from our vision statement on prosperity, security, and values. And in order to do this, we've put ourselves into 3 bureaux. I think you're familiar and you've met my colleagues. So we've got the Engaging Canadians Bureau, the Sustainable Economic Growth Partnerships Bureau, and the Social Development Partnerships Bureau. And so just briefly, I think that many of you are aware that the Engaging Canadians Bureau, which is led by Ariel Dulia, includes the Global Citizens Program, the Calls for Proposals Division, and the Outreach and Consultations team. So that's Ariel's group, and Megan Kane, Megan Wave. Megan, one of the deputy directors in that team who works on the Outreach and Consultations and also on Global Citizens Program. So the Bureau manages things like the International Youth Internship Program, the International Aboriginal Youth Internship Initiative, the Volunteer Cooperation Program. It also works with the provincial and regional councils, with CCIC and with other colleagues. The Sustainable Economic Growth Partnerships Bureau includes the Impact and Analysis Division, the Sustainable Economic Growth Division, and the Governance Division. And this is the bureau that provides strategic, operational, and technical impact advice and analysis. It also is our work on enhancing governance, human rights, and democracy in developing countries. And here we work quite closely with START and with the Anti-Crime Capacity Building Program. And it's also looking at the new partnerships on the sustainable economic growth side. So some really interesting innovations with CCA, with Desjardins, with a number of other partners that are frankly at the cutting edge of some interesting work on how do we provide opportunities and growth for people in developing countries. And then finally, there's the Social Development Partnerships Bureau, Lillian Chatterjee, which I think everyone knows Lillian. Lillian's here, yay, Lillian. So Lillian's got the Education Partnerships Division, the Food Security Division, and Health Partnerships Division. So a big portfolio, a lot on her plate. She manages it remarkably well. But those initiatives that Lillian works on with a number of you are really related to the children and youth strategy, so notably around maternal, newborn, and child health and education, and then some of the projects where we work quite closely with IDRC, for instance, on SIF-SURF, which I think a number of you are already familiar with, and environmental sustainability initiatives. And again, here it's an example of where we work closely with the GEOs, we work closely with Leslie's branch, and also with other government department colleagues. Donc moi je m'arrête ici parce que moi je pourrais continuer infiniment. Et j'aimerais céder la parole à ma collègue David Morrison. Comme je l'avais déjà mentionné, David est en voyage, mais il est le dirigeant principal pour le développement et il a enregistré un message pour cette séance d'information.
Well, hello everyone. It's my great pleasure to be with you here today and to join, at least virtually, the annual meeting of the CCIC. I know you're going to hear from my colleagues Lise and Elissa about how to navigate the amalgamated department. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to talk to you about my role as Chief Development Officer. Dans le cadre de mes fonctions, j'ai deux chapeaux. Je suis le sous-ministre adjoint responsable des Amériques, mais aussi j'ai l'honneur d'être le premier dirigeant principal du développement pour le ministère des Affaires étrangères, du commerce et du développement. So, as you may know, this role that I now have, in addition to my responsibilities in the Americas, is Chief Development Officer, which is a function that was created because of the amalgamation of CETA and DFATD. Management recognized that having a stream lead to represent the practice of development and the practitioners of development, practitioners that are now in a minority within the much larger department, would be an important element of the amalgamated department, given that development is now spread across about 7 branches. So my role as Chief Development Officer is analogous to the Chief Trade Commissioner, a position that's existed for many, many years, and the Chief Foreign Affairs Officer, a position that has existed for the past decade or so. As Chief Development Officer, I'm meant to act as a champion for development, a kind of ombudsperson that practitioners of development can turn to. And we have a small team that has been working hard over the past 6 months to try to ensure policy and program coherence across the 3 streams, as well as promoting knowledge sharing and awareness of the practice of development within the broader community of colleagues at DFATD. Je me tiens informé des questions entourant le volet relatif au développement grâce à l'appui d'un groupe consultatif interne, tout en veillant à ce que ces questions soient portées à l'attention des gestionnaires compétents pour trouver des solutions efficaces. Il s'agit des questions liées aux ressources humaines, aux outils, au système et à la gouvernance. So, in the initial period of my role as Chief Development Officer, I've been mainly focused internally, aided by this internal advisory group, to make certain that here at DFATD we have the tools, the processes, the systems, the people to meet the development challenges of the future. But that brings me to the question of how I see the role of Chief Development Officer evolving into the future. And here let me just say that I believe, and I try to tell colleagues every day, and I hope that this is a view broadly shared by many of you in the room today, that right now is a terribly exciting time for all of us to be involved in development. The world of development is evolving very rapidly. Development is occurring in many countries around the world at historically unprecedented rates. There are new actors, there are new challenges, so new mechanisms. So it's a terribly exciting time to be doing what we are doing. And I think it begs the question, from the point of view of this department, as to the appropriate role of public money well into the future in a world that is evolving so quickly. How can we ensure that our resources, all of our resources, which are inherently limited, have the greatest impact possible for the people that we're trying to serve? En raison des négociations actuelles portant sur les objectifs du millénaire pour le développement de l'après 2015, qui atteindront le point culminant cet automne, soit les processus de G20 et de G7 relatifs aux questions de développement et à la participation de nouveaux acteurs comme les pays de BRIC. Il est évident que les prochaines années seront une période excitante pour tous ceux qui travaillent dans le domaine de l'aide au développement. Our challenge will be to look across all of Canada's priorities and to explore new modalities, new partnerships, new mechanisms, new expertise to ensure that the department has everything it needs to maximize the impact that we have on poverty reduction. We rely on relationships with partners like all of you to collaborate with us as we explore these new issues, to share lessons from your own experience, and to provide innovative solutions to the complex problems faced by the poor today and into the future. À titre de dirigeant principal du développement, je suis heureux de pouvoir participer à cette discussion. Merci beaucoup de m'avoir invité à participer à votre assemblée annuelle. J'attends avec impatience l'occasion prochaine de pouvoir collaborer avec vous sur ces questions. Merci beaucoup.
And David really means that. He was very disappointed that he couldn't be here in person, and so I know he's looking forward to following up with many of you and that you're already engaging with him. We're very fortunate to have David as the Chief Development Officer. He's someone who brings considerable expertise, both having been here in Canada, but also internationally. And some of you, if you're not aware of David's background, he spent many, many years at the UN. He was with UNDP. He started as a JPO once upon a time in North Korea. And then he joined the Foreign Service after that and was posted in a couple of places, including Havana. Then he subsequently went back into the international system, back with UNDP, where amongst other things he was also head of net aid. He was with the World Economic Forum. So David kind of brings this breadth of knowledge and networks in his role as Chief Development Officer. So I think we're all very pleased that he has taken on this role. Donc j'aimerais inviter Lise Filiatrault à prendre la parole. Lise.
Merci beaucoup, Elissa, et un plaisir de vous voir ici, de reconnaître plusieurs visages dans la salle. Je suis très heureuse d'être ici ce matin. En fait, je vais vous parler surtout du modèle organisationnel en Afrique subsaharienne, puisque le thème du panel, c'est de vous aider à naviguer le nouveau ministère et un peu vous expliquer comment on est organisé maintenant en Afrique et un peu ce que ça nous permet. Et puis ensuite, on aura la chance de répondre aux questions si vous avez des choses plus précises sur lesquelles vous aimeriez que je porte attention. En fait, c'est un moment très opportun pour avoir cette conversation-là parce qu'hier, on célébrait le premier anniversaire de notre nouveau modèle organisationnel en Afrique. On a pris un peu de temps après la fusion pour regarder comment on devrait s'organiser pour mieux répondre à notre mandat. Donc, on a fait un peu de consultation et tout ça, et finalement, notre modèle est en place depuis maintenant 1 an. Et c'est un modèle, et Elissa l'a mentionné, donc je suis responsable de l'Afrique subsaharienne dans toutes les dimensions de ce que fait le ministère, c'est-à-dire autant la diplomatie que le commerce et le développement. Et le modèle organisationnel qu'on a choisi à l'Afrique, c'est d'amener l'intégration au niveau des directeurs généraux. Alors, on a 3 directions, we call them bureaus in English, qui sont menées par des directeurs généraux. On en a 2 qui représentent des sous-régions en Afrique et un qui est panafricain. Alors, je vais commencer par les bureaux, les directions sous-géographiques, si je peux les appeler comme ça. Donc, évidemment, l'Afrique de l'Ouest et centrale, et c'est Ken Neufeld qui est à la tête de cette direction. Donc, en Afrique de l'Ouest et centrale, Ken est responsable de l'ensemble de nos relations avec les pays africains de cette région-là. Je ne vais pas tous vous les nommer parce qu'il y en a plus d'une vingtaine, alors ça serait trop long, mais je pense que vous les connaissez. Alors, il est responsable à la fois pour les programmes de développement qui sont largement décentralisés. On parle du Mali, Sénégal, Burkina Faso, République démocratique du Congo, le Ghana, le Nigeria, le Bénin, pour ce qui est des pays pour lesquels on a des programmes de développement bilatéraux. Et il est aussi responsable pour l'ensemble de nos relations bilatérales avec l'ensemble des pays de la région. Donc, il est responsable également d'une direction c'est-à-dire d'une division qui gère nos relations à la fois sur le plan diplomatique, du commerce, mais du développement aussi de façon intégrée. Et également, il est responsable des relations avec nos missions à l'étranger dans ces pays, nos missions du Canada, mais dans ces pays en Afrique. Je vais revenir un peu sur les missions ensuite. Alors, la même structure est là pour le Bureau d'Afrique australe et de l'Est, qui est dirigé par Philippe Baker. Donc, encore une fois, on parle de responsable pour les programmes de développement, Tanzanie, Mozambique, Éthiopie, Soudan du Sud, Afrique du Sud et Kenya. Ensuite, responsable des missions que le Canada a dans cette même région et également responsable des relations bilatérales avec l'ensemble des pays de la région. Et encore une fois, je ne vous les nommerai pas, il y en a plus d'une vingtaine aussi. Donc, l'ensemble des relations bilatérales qui touchent à la fois le commerce, le développement et la diplomatie, les affaires étrangères de façon plus large. La troisième direction, the third bureau, this is the Pan-African Bureau, and this is headed by Patricia Malikael. And that bureau is the bureau that looks at Africa as a whole, as the subcontinent, because as I mentioned, it's sub-Saharan Africa, so North Africa is handled by my colleague that also covers the Middle East. So that bureau looks at all the PANAF affairs from a strategic perspective, looking at really having a strategic approach to the region, looking at the thematic area that Elissa referred to, all the different themes, economic growth, children and youth, but integrating also the trade dimension into it. Looking also at our relations with our partners, whether they're here in Canada or in Africa. This is also the bureau that has the responsibility for the development programs that are regional in nature. We have a number of those. We have Pan-Africa programs with regional institutions and regional partners. We also have a thematic program on extractives called Exceed, and this is also where we ensure a good coordination on major programs that are thematic, such as maternal, newborn, and child health. And this is also where we address our corporate processes within the branch, and where we also ensure a good horizontality with all the other functional parts of the department, as Elissa presented the whole department. So this is where we ensure also that we have a good horizontality across the other thematics that are covered in other branches, such as international security, for example. Consular affairs would be another one. And finally, this is also that the DG responsible for what we call our trade champion. We established a bit of a different model because our footprint on trade in Africa is fairly modest. And so we're also looking at how we approach trade from a regional perspective in Africa. Alors, ce que ce modèle-là nous permet, il est en place depuis 1 an, et comme Elissa le dit, on regarde constamment à raffiner nos modèles au fur et à mesure qu'on apprend comment travailler mieux ensemble. Mais ce modèle-là nous permet vraiment d'aller chercher la cohérence dont on a parlé, qui est vraiment le driver derrière la fusion. La cohérence entre les enjeux de commerce et développement, en particulier cette intersection, the nexus between trade and development, as we say in English. Également entre sécurité et développement, et on sait tous à quel point ce sont des enjeux très, très importants en Afrique, bien qu'on a de nombreux pays qui, en fait, évoluent de façon très positive. On a quand même plusieurs pays qui restent fragiles ou en état de crise, et aujourd'hui, d'ailleurs, on a vu ça dans les nouvelles avec le Burundi, par exemple. Donc, ça nous permet d'avoir une meilleure cohérence entre nos enjeux de sécurité et de développement. Ça nous permet aussi d'avoir un meilleur appui et une meilleure interaction avec nos missions dans les pays en Afrique. Elissa a parlé un peu du rôle des chefs de mission. En fait, les chefs de mission sont vraiment les intégrateurs et ils assurent la cohérence, mais par rapport au pays dans lequel on travaille, une cohérence pour l'ensemble des canaux du ministère et en fait au-delà de ça, parce que nos chefs de mission assurent la cohérence pour l'ensemble du gouvernement du Canada, mais on va s'attarder au ministère d'abord. Et on fait ça sur une base de gestion matricielle, beaucoup, et on pourra en parler si vous voulez, mais c'est aussi un modèle qui nous permet d'avoir une interaction plus étroite avec nos missions et mieux coordonnée. C'est aussi un modèle qui nous permet de déployer nos ressources de façon plus optimale, et encore une fois, Elissa a touché à ce point-là, qui nous permet d'avoir une vision stratégique pour l'ensemble de l'Afrique, mais en même temps d'avoir une cohérence par rapport à chacun des pays pour lesquels on travaille, une cohérence du point de vue canadien également. On peut vraiment essayer d'aller chercher une meilleure utilisation et un meilleur déploiement de nos ressources avec la fusion. Et j'ai parlé aussi de la coopération horizontale et je voulais parler aussi de comment on collabore avec les partenaires et en fait, je vais être heureuse de vous entendre là-dessus. I think that this model has also allowed us to better interact with our partners, whether they're here in Canada, and many of you are in the room right now. So to really give you a good one entry point to interact with Africa as a region, but also with our partners in Africa, whether they are the countries themselves or the organizations there. I think that I've heard that often from them, that they're quite happy that they are able to speak to us with us having one voice and making the links between the different dimensions of the relationship that Canada has with those countries or with those organizations. And I think I will also mention that it has allowed us, I think, to also improve the way we can make new partnerships, and we do that in collaboration with other branches, such as the Partnership for Innovation branch. But I think that we are better equipped now to really think more broadly and connect different partners together that we may not have thought of otherwise before. And finally, I'll mention also the opportunities for our staff to really grow in their career, to broaden their scope, and to collaborate and to really develop our collaboration skills. And I think that we are in a world of collaboration increasingly. Elissa was talking about how, you know, we are in different locations. Actually, for people working in the geographic areas, we're very used to work with people that are kilometers and thousands of kilometers away from us, and the technology helps on that front, but I think developing the collaboration skills is also something that I think that model offers. Évidemment, il n'y a aucun modèle qui est parfait, et en fait, un modèle organisationnel, ce n'est qu'une composante de ce qu'on utilise pour amener la cohérence et continuer d'avancer sur la fusion. Et il y a toujours des trade-offs, et je dois dire que je cherche une bonne traduction de trade-off, et je vais dire compromis réciproque, si on veut. Alors, au fur et à mesure qu'on travaille sur une cohérence entre les différents piliers du ministère, On veut continuer aussi à assurer une cohérence interne à l'intérieur de chacun de ces communautés. Alors, je ne répéterai pas ce que David Morrison vous a dit en termes de son rôle comme le chef pour le développement ou la communauté des praticiens du développement. Mais je pense qu'il y a toujours cette dynamique qu'on doit maintenir et regarder pour à la fois continuer de développer et d'approfondir notre expertise dans un secteur en particulier, le développement par exemple, ou le commerce, tout en assurant une cohérence et des interactions entre les piliers. Et ça, c'est, on doit sans arrêt là, chercher le bon équilibre à ce niveau-là. Et évidemment, assurer une bonne fertilisation croisée. Donc, je pense qu'il y a des opportunités de carrière qui s'ouvrent aussi pour notre personnel et dans leur interaction avec vous. Alors, je vais m'arrêter ici et puis on pourra en discuter davantage dans la période de questions. Merci.
Merci, Lise. Et dernièrement, Leslie, la parole est à vous.
Merci beaucoup. Last but hopefully not least, I can hear your stomachs growling from here, so I will be brief. And our colleagues have been very broad in their perspectives and views, but I'm going to be narrowing the focus somewhat right now. I'll be speaking to you about amalgamation in Canadian humanitarian action. I think most of you who know us know that prior to amalgamation, as Elissa had mentioned, that CEDA and DFAT maintained separate humanitarian teams. The CEDA team led on the humanitarian programming side of things, and the DFAT team led on humanitarian policy as well as the interdepartmental coordination in response to the whole of government responses to catastrophic natural disasters abroad. Both teams worked very closely together, and we were windows into each other's departments and into each other's organizational cultures. And Elissa used the word complementary roles, but we were very complementary but very supportive of perspectives and voices and discussions occurring within our departments on humanitarian issues. And we were often cited or referred to as a model of interdepartmental collaboration. So in the lead up to amalgamation, many thought that merging the two teams would be a strong possibility. However, post-amalgamation, we continue to have two humanitarian teams with the same division of labor as before. But that's not to say that things have not changed. Obviously, the environment has changed, and our governance system has changed as well. And we have found the need to revisit and reconfirm things like our mutual roles and responsibilities and our internal communications. And hopefully that has not been something that you have felt, because we've worked very hard internally to be better than we were before. Elissa and Lise both mentioned that amalgamation has been about enhancing coherence and creating a cohesive organizational culture. And a lot of work has been done across the department to advance this goal, but it still is a work in progress. On the issue of coherence, many of our Canadian NGO partners voiced their concern that amalgamation could potentially lead to a politicization of Canadian humanitarian action due to increased expectations that our humanitarian action would seek alignment with other government priorities, or that there would be a hierarchy of priorities and humanitarian action would not come to the top, or that would be like a UN integrated mission where the humanitarian action side of things might be perceived as being less important. I really think, though, despite these concerns, that our humanitarian partners have in fact experienced a lot of continuity in our behavior, but you're welcome to disagree with me. Not you. And that our decisions there's been a lot of continuity in our decisions as well as in how we are interacting with you all. I would even say that we are a growing business line. It's very unfortunate to say that, and we've just had our biggest year ever financially. So at the same time, we do recognize that access to beneficiaries and the safety and security of aid workers are increasingly problematic for you, our humanitarian partners, as well as for our international partners. And we need to continue to work together to promote humanitarian principles and an awareness of how important and relevant these principles are. And I think many of you have been witness to Minister Parody on, I know at least 2 occasions where he's been very publicly spoken about the importance of humanitarian principles, as well as the importance of the safety and security of humanitarian workers. And I'm also happy to say that the Department's Civil Society Partnership Policy also affirms our commitment to do so as well. So while the initial reaction of some of our partners, and I'm not going to name you publicly who you might have been, though I could, was one of concern and caution. I think we should all see amalgamation as providing opportunities for better mobilizing our diplomacy to engage in humanitarian issues. Canada really does have a strong track record of this, and it was when we had 2 separate, in fact, 2 separate departments merging together to speak on these issues, whether on the issues of safety and security at the UN, whether on good humanitarian donorship, or whether on civil military coordination. And we are building on these experiences in the new amalgamated department. And there are opportunities to collaborate with Canadian NGOs and partners on this as well, and this is also a commitment made under the Civil Society Partnership Policy, which affirms our commitment to working together on key humanitarian policy and operational issues. And I'm just delighted that that policy does take a very comprehensive look at all partnerships. So we're in a world where humanitarian needs are increasing, where the operational environments are becoming more and more challenging for all of you and your local partners, and where partners are stretched to the maximum. So it's even more important that we work together now, internally and externally, building on what we do well, learning from recent experiences, and finding ways so that humanitarian actors can influence international diplomacy to create more humanitarian space, more respect for IHL, and mobilize interest in resolving protracted crises, because that is really where we need to focus our energy going forward. I believe that we have a really good track record of positive policy dialogue with Canadian NGOs and partners to build on here. So I'll end there, and I look forward to any of your comments or questions. Thank you. Merci.
Thanks very much, Leslie. You're the only one that got applause, just for the record. I mean, I think this area of dealing with conflict-affected, natural disaster-affected, fragile states is a really interesting area if we want to look at it from the perspective of amalgamation, right? Because it's the one where we should hopefully be able to better leverage our tools over time. You know, when I look at this area, having been in it for a very, very long time, and Leslie and I have been partners in crime on this forever, I think one of the things that we've always been frustrated with is I would say that Canadian civil society and the government of Canada, you know, we're fairly good at basic service delivery. We're also, at least we know what needs to be done in the area of security system reform, right? Cops, courts, corrections, we can do that relatively well. But where we've systematically, as an international community, fallen down, often it's on job creation in countries that have experienced crises, it's mitigating those elements, it's the prosperity piece of engaging in fragile and vulnerable contexts. And hopefully, this is one of those areas where amalgamation should enable us to bring a new tool to the toolkit. And this is something that the 3 of us have been talking about quite a bit internally, which is the fact that most crises that we're dealing with now internationally are protracted. Most of them are due to the failure of us to find political solutions for a number of these. We're seeing them last 17 to 25 years on average. So how is it that we can better bring together the different tools in our toolkit to help support these countries, to help support individuals that are trying to thrive in these very difficult contexts? And that's something that, again, amalgamation should hopefully be able to help us to think through a little bit better, because you don't have the natural silos that have otherwise existed. So we'll see. This is a work in progress. And there's a number of these areas. I use that as a bit of an example of some of the things that we're hoping that an amalgamated department can help us think through a little bit better. But we've talked for a lot, so we're going to stop and open the floor for a bit of a conversation, questions, comments that you may have.